The road was long and endless. I must have passed 10 or so cities. Each from a distance was dark and grey. I now thought that each and every city had been turned into this devastation. I parked the bus on the edge of a bridge over a river. I walked down the extent of the bridge. The leaves of autumn still remained with yesterday's news as I walked, kicking the dust of human civilization along. It felt as if time itself had been slowed down. It reminded me of a time when I used to walk back and forward from college devoid of company. It felt as if all those autumns had once again returned. I looked from the bridge over the river towards the city, across the waves, and saw the familiar sights of dusty grey worn-out buildings, front missing, an eerie silence which came with all its pain. As I walked off the bridge, machine-gun bullets sparked off the golden bridge. I threw myself to the ground. My eyes looked forward. I saw a man with a large beard charging, machine-gun in hand, straight towards me. Then I saw the sole of his boot. I woke up, blood dripping from my cheek, tied up in what appeared a dark cellar. My captor stood in front of me, almost as if he was awaiting my awakening. The man wore a heavy beard. His eyes were yellow in colour. He would cough and splutter, choking out large white balls. His posture was crooked, to say the least. His arms appeared longer than was normal, his hands constantly shaking, which was extremely worrying, as he had his finger in the trigger of his fully armed machine gun. He continued to look at me, as I did him. I wondered what he made of me, why indeed he had decided to kidnap me, but my intention was lost, as then I heard a small cough. I turned my head to the right and saw another prisoner. It was a boy, who could not have been more than 10 or so. The boy was also looking at me. His bright hazel eyes shined with an ease. They were puffy and tear-stained. His face had a fair complexion, but it was the gaze towards me of such hope. I immediately turned towards the bearded man and opened my mouth to speak, but before I could utter a word, he slapped me with the back of his hand. "Don't you dare judge me. You think I like doing what I do? It's got to be done, that's all." "What has?" I asked. He ignored me and continued on his own path, or so I thought. "I hope you're going to do better than the last one. I had to kill him. I don't want to have to kill you. Please don't ask me to kill you." "I won't," I said, most effectively. "Oh, you will. They all do, you see him. He's the last, the longest. Doesn't talk back much, but just enough." He knelt down by me, placed his bulky hand on my kneecap, and began to squeeze it tight. As he did so, I could hear it click in and out of its socket. I screamed in agony. As I did so, I noticed he did not watch what he was doing, but was transfixed with the pain clearly displayed in my eyes. "In pain, there is such sweet joy, but it's not as I would like it to be. Once you've killed one man, the sweetness can soon become sour, and one is endlessly looking for a new high to replace this tawdry. Sometimes I spend a lot of time wishing I wasn't the man that I find that I am. Once you've washed the dried, crusted blood of someone you wish could have been your friend, you feel a sense of remorse that only a killer could know of. How I wish I were not the man that I find that I am. Can you understand that? Do you see that inside me also beats a heart that only needs to be found? I often wonder, could I have been different if I had found someone earlier? Was I always doomed to this triumphal fate?" As he spoke his last words, his voice was raised, deep but disturbing in the extreme. I did not know how to answer him, or whether indeed he was speaking to me at all. I opened my mouth to say some carefully chosen words, but before I could, he laid another fist into me, this time my stomach, winding me. He walked over to the child I watched with anticipated horror. He bent down close to him and placed his hands down his hair to his neck, and held it tight, almost one might say in a loving gesture. The boy did not seem to have any cuts or bruises on him, but his eyes, staring wide towards me, filled me with rage. I tried to pull my hands free from the tightly bound rope. He saw me struggle and turned his attention, thankfully, but once again to me. "Why have you captured us?" "Have you never found yourself lonely?" "Yes, haven't we all?" I said. "Then there is your answer, friend. May I call you friend? I hope I may. He pulled himself up and walked off, saying something about needing to get some food. The cellar was dark and damp. One window lit diffused light through, due to its dirty condition. I looked towards the boy, who again was looking towards me. "Are you okay?" I said softly. He did not answer me. "We're going to get out of this, don't you worry," I said, not knowing whom I was reassuring more. "Please, mister," he said. He only said 2 words, but his tone and pitch, the way in which they were delivered, touched my heart, and I felt a connection with this boy whose wide eyes gazed onto me. I had always wanted a child of my own when my wife and I were married. The inability to have children caused such heartache, especially around other parents and their children, who would flock to play with us, but soon would leave, but the pain would not. The boy was such an adorable boy who looked up to me as if I were his father. Later on, before the bearded man returned, on hearing his footsteps, possibly in fear, he held his arm out so that I could hold his hand. It was strange, I thought, how such a love between father and son, parent and child, can bring to even the most ineffectual man. It was such a special love, and within was a power that no criminal could obtain. It filled me with a rage that if it were physically manifested, it would rip its way through these ropes and through to that man. I would have wished to transfer my anger physically, as when the bearded man returned, he undid the ropes of the boy and dragged him away with him. I shouted out, "Where are you taking him? Take me! What are you doing with him?" But only the boy's cries gave answer to my most awkward of questioning. For the next hour I pulled, yanked, tugged at the ropes which bound me tight. The only marks they made were through my wrists, but the pain was easier to bear than was that occurring within the chambers of my heart. Eventually I managed to fray the ropes, and then I was free. I slowly approached the door, turned the handle, and tilted my head between the gap of the door and the panel. I could see nothing, as there was only a few candles lighting the corridor. I opened the door a bit more and squeezed through the gap. As I walked down the corridor, I heard moaning and groaning, but it was not the boy. The voice was older, mature. Maybe it was the bearded man, but again, there was more than one tone that groaned out. There were several doors on my left and right, so I stepped cautiously up to the first one and slowly opened it. I was confronted with a macabre scene. A light shone down the ceiling, highlighting a man caged in an armchair. Metal grids held down his arms, legs, and connected his face to the back of the chair. His mouth was wide open, his tongue was missing. Was this possibly the man that he had said he had killed? Maybe when he talked too much, he removed them, as well as the offending article. As I walked closer to him, I was unprepared for this reaction. As he jumped up and down towards me, he managed with demonic ability to free the chair from the ground, and he came straight at me. I jumped back, slammed the door, trapping his fingers, but the weight of the door shut it close. But the finger I noticed sticking out the door frame was not solid. It was as if there had never been any muscle or blood within them. I moved down the corridor and entered another room. This was empty, but again there was a chair and a light turned off, hanging above. The next door I found a man on a rack, his body stretched, one of his ribs sticking out of his skin. The man did not seem to breathe or move, but I felt he was alive. Maybe his stomach was so outstretched that the breathing could not easily be seen. His hands dropped by his side. There inside his nails I saw the splinters of wood shoved in, which even I felt the pain as I saw it. I went closer and looked at his battered face, of which all recognition of who he was must surely have gone. I found a knob at the end of the table and turned it, as his body slowly relaxed, but the length remained. How long he'd been there I do not know. Then he regained consciousness and started to scream out in pain. I tried to place my hand on him to console him, but nothing could be done. I could not let him carry on screaming. I wonder if it had been my releasing the pressure that had put the pain on his body, and I reluctantly turned the knob tighter. As I did so, I heard the bone crack. His rib bone, which had been popped back inside his chest, stuck out again, and he stopped screaming. Oh, what horror it was to have to inflict torture on a man in order for him to cease his suffering. I tried one more room in which I heard the noise. I opened the door. There on what looked like a surgeon's operating table lay a man, his stomach wide open. There was a metal contraption holding his stomach apart, and cling film was placed over the hole in his stomach to stop the blood from seeping out. One assumed in order to allow the man to suffer the pain he wished to inflict rather than allowing him the less painful and quicker death of bleeding to death. Both to me seemed utterly unbearable, but to the man on the table I suspect he would choose for himself the quicker death. Above the metal contraption there, which looked like a circular metal rod, it was wired to a battery that lay on the floor next to the table. What it was for I was not sure, as there was nothing on it, and it didn't seem to be connected to the man. I walked over to him. He appeared unconscious. Maybe at this time he was finally dead. I peered through the cling film, but could not see much inside. His heart, indeed, had ceased. He was thankfully dead. I was about to walk out of the room when I slipped on something. I placed my hand out to ease my fall. The nearest thing to me was the man. My hand pierced the cling film, and dark red blood poured down the floor. As it did so, I noticed what I had slipped on. It looked like a roll of uncooked sausages. I picked them up and noticed that the length was astounding, and then, with full ferocity, I realized what they were, and what that circular metal rod was. These were the poor man's intestines. This metal rod connected to the battery must have slowly wound them out of his body. I dropped them immediately back on the blood-stained floor and slipped myself out of this room. In the final room that I entered, I found a truly macabre sight. The room, on first glance, looked completely empty, and I was on my way to walk out when some spotlights caught my attention. Near the far wall of this room, I walked closer, and the lights revealed the truly horrific sight. There on the wall were 6 human bodies. Their legs were pacing in the air. The bodies hung up by chains wrapped around a metal beam high up. The tops of their heads were missing, sliced off, I reckon, judging by the smooth and straight line left. I could see wires trailing on the ground connected to a generator. I followed the wires which led to their brains. I can only imagine that he had wired this up himself, how he would know which impulse in the brain would make a man walk. I imagined how he would have sliced the first man, placed his cold fingers in the jelly-like brain matter, moved his index finger one way or another to see what reaction it got, until, with his hands in between this man's brain, could get him to walk. What kind of evil could do such a barbaric thing? How could any man stomach to do such an act? But not only had he done so, he had also put them in a row and spotted it as if he was setting up some work of art, a showpiece almost. I tugged at the wires, and with a spludge they came out. On the floor lay the wires, clipped, still holding on to a bit of red brain tissue. The legs immediately stopped there in the air pacing, and I turned the spotlight off and shut the door tight. I walked through the corridor. There was at least 6 other rooms. What lay behind the doors I did not have the stomach to see. It was as if I had walked into a torture chamber of the past. Such cruelty to ever have been inflicted on one's fellow men seemed even more barbaric now that it was not commonplace. I was at the end of the corridor, and by a staircase I went up it and found myself in what appeared some kind of living room in a very old house. I could see a light was on northward. I slowly walked there, and in the kitchen I could see the young boy and the bearded man eating off the same plate. The bearded man seemed agitated, as if he knew I was there. I stayed as still and quiet as is humanly possible. He turned to face the door and seemed to be sniffing something. He leaped out of the chair and for the door. I was unable to move in time, and he found me by its side. He was furious, as I had never seen such a man, as if I had walked on some event I should not have seen. Maybe he did not want me to see the compassion that lay within him as he shared his meal with his young captor. He threw me across the room, his eyes full of pure rage. The boy came running out to see what was going on. The man, not having time to restrain the boy, launched his left arm out, catching the boy full on the face, throwing him to the ground unconscious. As the bearded man saw where he landed, I used the opportunity of him not looking towards me to get up and charge at him. As I approached him, he turned to see me, but it was too late, and we both flew across the living room floor, sliding across the table and onto the floor. We tumbled across the floor. He managed to get himself up on top of me and laid a punch on my nose. "Do you think you can beat me? When I finish with you, you will wish you had stayed in the cellar. Why must they all turn against me? All I wanted was a little company." "You can't force company," I exclaimed. The more angry I become, the greater pain you shall suffer before your death. You think I'm scared of a man who kidnaps children. He was alone like me, wandering these lonely streets, and so I saved him from his own misery. I gave him love and affection. He is my son now, mine. You make me sick. You think you can get away with anything you like. Always above the law, above the common decency of men. Let me tell you, today it ends. Today it ends. I lifted my leg from below him and thrusted him into the wall behind us. His body slid down the wall onto the floor, and he did not move again. I went over to the boy and lifted his limp body up. His eyes slowly opened, but the shine that I had seen there before was gone. Then his eyes widened up again, but they were looking beyond me. Before I had time to look around to see what it was that caught his stare, I felt a wire pull tight upon my throat. The bearded man had awoken. From his pocket he had taken out one of his more conveniently sized torch items. It felt like some kind of wire. He tugged it once more, and I felt trickles of blood hit my lowered hands. The wire had cut into the outer layers of my skin. I felt my whole body cease, my eyes bulge, my throat unable to swallow or breathe heavily, afraid of allowing the wire to penetrate further into my supple throat.